I just want to start by saying, before I begin, 5 years ago in startup competitions, you would never see an underwear startup. And I'm a guy who invests in brands for a living, and for me by the way, I met you one time randomly in a conference in Dublin, and I just realized that, so I have to come say hi to you. But it's so exciting to see that today we can actually apply the technology principles and startup principles to building brands. And that inspires me, because 5 years ago we would have said, why in the world would we ever consider looking at a startup that does underwear? So it's really fantastic. So what I'm here today to talk about is the fact that retail is not actually dying. And to talk a little bit of our view of the future of retail. To start out, give you a little bit about my background. I come from a background of consumer goods. So I started my career in supply chain and distribution for a company called the Republic of Tea, and moved into consumer web as the company evolved to go direct to consumer. I also managed a catalog, it gives me a really unique view on sort of the way that business used to be done versus the way it's done today. And like most things, a lot of the things we used to do are coming back to being done today. And so it's pretty interesting to see that change. My next step was moving to a company called Zappos.com, where we were the first company, known as the first company to sell shoes online, which at the time was about as weird as just any startup you would ever see. I headed product at that company, and then later built a building when we moved our company to downtown Las Vegas, along with our CEO, Tony Hsieh, and we developed the old Las Vegas City Hall into our HQ. And then a number of us started a group called Downtown Project in Las Vegas to focus on revitalizing downtown Vegas, which if you haven't been to, I highly suggest. It's the real side of Vegas, the original side of Vegas, and it's a lot of fun. I'm also learning to free dive, so that picture is actually me underwater, and it's probably one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever done. I'm a relatively long life rock climber and now free diver, and I'm trying to learn how to spearfish, and so that's what I do when I'm not doing retail, which is itself weird. A little bit about what we do. So about 5-6 years ago, we started a firm focused on early stage venture companies in Las Vegas, and a couple of years later, we really started to isolate down to what we know. If you look at my background, my partner's background, really the only thing we're qualified to be doing is working with companies that sell things to consumers. And so over time, we focused our work in two distinct areas. The first is, and where we started, is in venture investments in early stage startups focused on the technologies that power the future of retail. And as we evolved, we moved towards making longer term, deep investments in companies that make their own products, focus on consumers, and deliver collections of products to consumers, growing slowly and methodically over time. When people ask me what we do for a living and I say we invest in long-term brands, they say that's revolutionary. And I say, no, if you ask my grandfather if what we do for a living makes sense, he'd say, oh, that makes complete sense. If I told him that I was investing in tech companies that I hope to go very, very big, he'd say that's completely crazy. So basically, I'm doing what my grandfather told me to do years ago, but it took me a while to get there. Our team came from Zappos. We are four partners who have pretty much built our lives around building a shoe company online. If any of you is not familiar with Zappos, started in 1999. The founders actually left Zappos about a year into it. Our group kind of came together piece at a time, starting with our CEO, Tony Hsieh, who, of the four of us, from a different period in Zappos' life, he's the only one who's still there, which is pretty interesting. Today, as I mentioned, we do two things. We invest in early stage companies focused on the future of commerce. These are companies we believe will have the ability to touch the entire commerce ecosystem. And then we call our other practice deep equity. You all familiar with, for example, True Capital's approach to investing in brands. We would consider ourselves a little bit earlier stage than that. Over time, we've built that practice into effectively what we refer to as early stage private equity in non-venture backed companies who have an incredible sourcing competency and the ability to really own every step of the production process of their products. We like products that have a familiar value proposition to consumers, and we're generally the only company's institutional investor in a company. We like to be able to work directly with founders and management without having other investors, particularly venture investors, trying to drive a brand to do crazy things. It'll put the brand at risk. So let's talk a little bit about retail. These are the headlines from the last week. Everything is falling apart. This year, there have been as many bankruptcies in the retail sector already as there were all year last year. There are more stores closing, it seems, than there could possibly be stores to close. It's an incredible, incredible bit of carnage if all you do is read the Wall Street Journal or all the tech presses. But in fact, if you look at the data, retail sales are up. E-commerce sales are driving that, but they're not the only thing driving that. Retail is not dead. Retail is just shifting. The things that are dying are the places that oftentimes sell other people's things. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. First, let's talk about what consumers expect from retail. What do they actually want from retailers when they interact with them? They want to do two things. The role for retail for consumers is to discover, to learn, to figure out what they need in their lives, to find out about new things, to find new ways to buy their products, and simply to get them. So the idea is that I find what I want and I get it. And it used to be to do all of those things, we would go to Macy's, or we would go to a department store, we would go to a retailer. Today we go to lots of different places. But these two things are now very, very different businesses. And the reason that started to happen is we had this convergence of things that all happened at one time. Things that doesn't seem as though there was a master plan to these things happening, but these things converged in the last 5 years and have enabled incredible levels of innovation that we didn't anticipate 5 to 10 years ago. The first thing that happened is manufacturing innovation made it possible to start small. 10 years ago, starting an underwear brand would have taken millions and millions and millions of dollars just to get a prototype out of a factory, if you could find the factory in the first place. That is the way manufacturing worked. Scale was critical. Today, it's not so critical. We can go on Alibaba and we can find a factory. We can start companies that appeal to very, very unique types of customers. Wild Thing on the left is one of our portfolio companies. They are 100% squarely focused on the tomboy market, tomboy fashion. You might say that must be a tiny industry. It's a $150 million a year industry, but it's spread across dozens and dozens and dozens of retailers because there was never one brand that said, we're going to serve this demographic. And many of you might be familiar with Rafa, who said, we're not going to go mainstream, we're not going to go down market, we are going to focus on the cycler, the hardcore cycler. E-commerce platform innovation made it possible to reach consumers. So now we can actually talk to consumers directly. I don't have to go lease a store, put up a sign, hire a team, and so forth. An office or a store, particularly the case of Zappos, an office in Las Vegas can do the work to reach millions of people around the globe. That changed things. You can do that now from your home. You can start a company today. So the e-commerce innovation allowed us to be able to facilitate the transactions, to talk to customers, to do the things that we need to do to be retailers. So now as a brand, I can go direct to consumer, which I couldn't do 10 or 15 years ago. Had innovations that we have today in e-commerce existed then, there's a relatively good chance that Zappos wouldn't exist today. There wouldn't have been an opportunity for them. And then logistics innovation. This is probably the most critical to the getting part of what we've been talking about. In retail, we have to deliver the product. So we used to go rent big stores. They're expensive. They're on very nice streets, or they're ginormous, like a department store, and they have lots and lots of inventory because that's the only place you could buy product. They are effectively the most expensive warehouses in the world. But today, those warehouses come to you. UPS comes to your door. Amazon Prime delivers in 2 days or less. I live in Los Angeles, where I can get most things from Amazon delivered same day. I don't know how they do it. Postmates, if I can't do it that day, I can do it within an hour. I've my last laptop, because it was an emergency, I ordered on Postmates, and it was delivered 2 hours later. I don't even exactly know where it came from. So then if you're a retailer, what do? Some retailers have carved out a niche. We started to think years ago about the role of retail, and particularly the role of the physical store, as needing to be consultative. So a lot of people want to talk about experiential, and they say that we we must create a cool store experience. So we put cool signs in our stores, and we put lots of technology, and we put a coffee shop that sells or gives away pretty terrible coffee. We do all of the things that make it seem like an experience, but we forget that the stores that are nailing it have carved out a niche. One niche is fast fashion. Zara is not really a retailer. Zara is a supply chain company. They've built an entirely new market around how to do things quickly. Consultative industries, like in the US, we have Home Depot and home improvement. You go to Home Depot into a store when you have a pile of stuff that you found in a broken object. Say you have a broken toilet and you grab the piece that's broken and you have no idea what to do with it. You walk in and say, "Help me." You don't even know how to Google that. What do I do? And service companies like REI, where you identify with the lifestyle and you go in and you learn how to hike. You learn how you learn exactly how you need to be the customer that you want to be. What do I do with these shoes? What do I need to do to be a great climber, a great hiker? You are a service company. Zappos is a service company. Zappos delivers products you can buy at thousands of stores nationwide, but they deliver it in a way that's unique and different, and they take care of their customer. Those are niches. So you have the helpful Home Depot, and then you have the bland mass stores. So when these other stores started to grow over time, this is actually a photo of, I believe, the Gap. When you go to a store today they've vanillaed everything down. So they don't really speak to any major consumer, any specific consumer. They speak to lots of consumers. And now that I have the ability to buy tomboy clothes if I'm a tomboy, I don't need to go to stores. I don't want to go to stores that don't identify with me and help me find stuff that fits my lifestyle. What is the consequence of that? 40% off everything. The bankruptcies we saw a moment ago. This slide used to include a picture of a Kmart that was just a pile of stuff on a shelf. And that's the other way it goes, is you just kind of stop caring. So customers wanted these specialized products, and now they can get them. They get them two different ways. They buy them from a company that get it to them quickly. They don't really care where they buy it. Amazon, very few people really care as much about the fact that they're buying from Amazon as the fact that Amazon will bring it quickly. And companies like Rafa that identify with a direct consumer, a very, very specific type of consumer. They aren't going to dumb down. And most of these businesses are built on direct, these new emerging brands. They have a direct relationship with their customer. They identify with them. But they extend their reach with physical stores and wholesale. We often at conferences like this talk a lot about the future of digital. And we say that everything's going to be e-commerce in the future. But every one of us will leave here at some point in the next couple of days. We'll go to a store. We'll go to a restaurant. We'll talk to a human being. And Alexa's phenomenal, and Alexa will continue to get better, but Alexa's not a human being yet. Hopefully, in our lifetime, that won't happen because that freaks me out. These stores, they use physical stores uniquely. They have smaller footprints. They build national retail partnerships. They go to interesting places. They use stores as event centers to engage with customers. They think of a store, when they're thinking about same-store sales, they think of stores as the center of a city, and they compensate their stores and their store employees for what happens in that whole market. And people talk a lot about same-store sales. You read, that's pretty much the extent of most of the headlines. And the problem with same-store sales is they don't reflect the business. When you buy a piece of clothing at a store, what do? You figure out what you like. You figure out your preference, and then you go home and buy every color of it. That's what you do when you shop online. You shop multi-channel. And they build this model into their REIT relationships. This is probably the most critical thing of the future that we'll start to see happen more and more, is that this physical real estate that's built on the backs of retail sales will begin to evolve. And these are what these smart retailers are doing in the future. Physical stores are not going away, they're just getting smarter. So the way we think of it is, retail is not necessarily dying, bad retail is expiring. When you think about the evolution of bland retail, non-focused retail, non-focused demographics, you have a really bad convergence of a few different things. You've got a bunch of retailers that sell stuff that people don't want, or people can more easily have delivered. They sell it from expensive storefronts in subpar locations with under-engaged, often underpaid employees. So when I describe it that way, it's really not rocket science. It's probably not doing super well, but a lot of retail is doing super well. Retail's not dying. Bad retail is expiring. So we started to think a lot about what makes up in our business, we started to think a lot about what makes up the full retail industry. How many different types of companies are there, and how do we think about what we're going to do in the future? And I'll start kind of from the bottom and from the right side and move to the left. First, we see a lot and we talk a lot about the disruptors in the market. These are the companies that are going to market first with a new pathway. They're the first to try something crazy. They need lots and lots of money to convince people to do it. This is Warby Parker. This is Dollar Shave Club. This is Casper. All these businesses are revolutionary. They're not incremental. There's tech platforms. These are the companies that power everything that we do. In the early days, it was the Shopify. It was the e-commerce platforms that allow us to do the things that we want to do in retail. All of those things are built to make brands work. There's a service and marketplace retailers, the buyers and sellers. This is an Etsy. This is an eBay. These are people that never touch the product. These are retailers that build a relationship directly with a specific demographic. There's companies that I like to refer to somewhat controversially as Instagram brands. Getting into the brand space, these are the brands that sell effectively product that they bought from a supplier that was already made, and they did incredible marketing to make you want it. But when you really break it down, it's just the same product you can buy somewhere else for either cheaper or more easily. The ones that last, the companies that last, are the brands that build high-quality products to a focused consumer. We've moved away from a world of mass retailers. We've moved away from a world of mass brands, and now we're creating products that people want. And we know as consumers that we can get precisely what we want, rather than having to settle for the thing that was built for the mass market. Those, to us, are the companies that last. So generally speaking, when you look at retail, we used to think of the world as the manufacturer, importer, distributor, retailer, and consumers. In logistics, we used to think of this as the containers get smaller as we move down that chain. And today, the container, it's actually, if you order an Apple computer on apple.com, it will ship to you from China in 2 days. That is mind-boggling, that you can ship a product as quickly from China as you can from your own country. That is the way the world works today. So what's happening to these mass companies? We think there's a big difference in the world between mass brands and mass companies. The mass brands are just big brands. It's a billion-dollar product. It is Hellmann's mayonnaise. It is The Gap. It is a one-size-fits-all brand. But the companies that own these businesses are much larger than those brands. And the way we see the world over the next 5 to 10 years is these companies are going to transform from a collection of 4 or 5 ginormous brands to a collection of hundreds of brands. And where you see that trend starting to really take hold, and it's in a, kind of the peak of the cycle that started a number of years ago, is in CPG, consumer packaged goods, specifically food. The brands that are available on the shelf at your local supermarket today are vastly different than the brands that were available 10, 20 years ago, but a lot of them are owned by the same people. And so we're starting to see the same thing happen in apparel, for example. Men's Warehouse hopes to become the same kind of collection. PVH and LVMH have started that process. One of our companies just sold to PVH recently, True & Co., and that's the sort of beginning of their move in that direction. VF Corp has demonstrated that that's the business they want to be in, that they have historically been billion-dollar brand buyers. Today they're looking smaller because that is the future of starting brands. Do you want to start your own brand? We're just not good at it. But why aren't they buying more brands that we see in the headlines? Because the valuations are whack. It's very unlikely that we're going to see many billion-dollar brands emerge in the future. But we're going to see many billion-dollar companies. To us, small is the new normal. And the way you build that is you have to start thinking about brands as equal parts of these things. Brands are not marketing companies, and they're not design companies. They are all of these things. When we meet incredible entrepreneurs building great brands, we want to talk about sourcing. We want it to take an hour. We want them to just bleed how they source their product and make every piece of it. And we want to look at a spreadsheet that looks at the next 5 years of cash flow that demonstrates that they understand that it's not just about making great Instagram products. To us, so let's talk about the economics of this, and then we'll wrap up. The cardinal rule of brands to us is that a brand's capacity to grow is limited to its available cash. So when you start thinking about how a brand's going to scale, what you can't do is say, this market's a $1 billion market. My valuation should be $2 billion. You have to say, we're probably going to grow over time based on the amount of cash we have to replenish inventory. And we're going to grow slowly, and we're going to grow strongly, and we're going to build long-term customer relationships. The finance problem that you end up with in these types of businesses, it just never ends. You're never going to have enough cash to grow your business. And so even billion-dollar companies have this problem. So the way we started to think about it is in order to understand how investment works, you have to think about the way investors invest. And one of the challenges that we saw was that in venture capital, you need investments to do a lot of crazy things. But for brands, you need them to work slowly and grow slowly over time. For venture investments, we've come up with this idea of the minimum acceptable return, meaning for venture companies, if I'm investing in a bunch of tech startups, I'm expecting about half to 3/4 of them to die. So obviously, if I want to make a great return on my overall investment portfolio, I have to have 1 or 2 of them knock it out of the park. This doesn't really work so well for brands. In brands, when they go down, lots and lots and lots of people lose their jobs. When brands do well, guess what? They only sell for 1 to 3x revenue. This is true for Zappos. This is true for Dollar Shave Club. This is true for everything in between. Brands that sell products sell for 1 to 3x revenue. So if you're going to raise capital for a brand, how can you be so short term? You have to think long term. And to think long term, you have to think about being a great finance company, having great defensible product, and having a way to build a long-term valuable relationship with your customer. Venture capital is structurally unsound for a lot of brands. This is the biggest problem we see in the market today, is venture capital pushes these product brands to do things that are unrealistic, not realizing that economics are all about how many pieces of underwear you can replenish when you sell one to one of your customers. It's just math. In the future, we're going to see an increase in the acquisition demand for small companies. These smaller profitable demands we're already seeing, small profitable companies we're starting to see a lot of demand for. The unprofitable ones are starting to go to zero. People don't want to touch them because they don't want to have to subsidize their losses for the next 20 years. These companies have been selling profitable product for a very, very long time. So what's a brand to do? This is kind of how we think when we think about what's going to happen in the next 20 years of this market with the advancement of Alexa, with the advancement of Amazon, with drones delivering product to you, with all these efficient things happening on the logistics and acquisition side for the commodity products or even for the great products. How do you do well as a company? How do you do well as a brand? And what you really have to do is build for the long term. That's it. It's really simple. You have to obsess over the stuff that you do, the products that you make. You have to obsess over your customers and obsess over quality and build for the long term. So with the time we have left, I've got time for questions. Any questions? We'll go here. Well, yeah, they're here.
How do you see the role, you talked about the sort of the brand going direct to its consumer, but you've also talked about the rise of Amazon and people like that. How do you see these brands working with companies like Amazon to build their reach?
So the way we think about Amazon over the next 5 or 10 years is that it's a logistics company. So in a lot of ways, you can view Amazon as a competitor to standard retail, but it really is just an acquisition tool. It's how a customer gets a product. So if you're in the brand business or you're in the retail business, the only way you can sort of supplant them is to have products that you can't buy at Amazon that aren't considered sort of categorical commodities. And at least our theory on the best way to pursue that strategy is to make products that are uniquely different, not just Hellmann's mayonnaise with a different label on it. But at the end of the day, if you're making your own products and you're doing it well, you shouldn't be afraid of Amazon because you can just find new customers via Amazon, or you can find new customers via Nordstrom, or whatever the retailer happens to be at the time. Someone else had a thought somewhere. Oh, okay, cool. So if you guys want to throw any eggs at me or whatever, or ask me questions later, I'll be around. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just had a quick one.
Hi.
Hi. You mentioned that for a brand, their potential to grow is just based on how much capital,
Yeah.
pretty much you can put into the business. And I guess, as a brand, how would you advise? I mean, what is the strategy? Just to go out and raise as much capital as you possibly can, or like, is there a kind of
It's
a
to
way you would
understand.
recommend
Yeah, I
to
understand your
do
question.
that?
Like it's understanding the minimum acceptable return and the investor's intent. So if you're going to work backwards from I want this to be a $200 million company, then the potential your potential to trade is like 1 to 3x revenue. And so you have to work backwards from that and figure out what are the intent of your investors, what is their time horizon. You can be very, very successful as an investor or a brand seeking investment in that space. The challenge is you can't assume that based on valuation growth and so forth that you're going to somehow be able at really any point in the future to exit beyond that 1 to 3x revenue cap. So when you're raising capital, you have to think a lot about that exit. So when you think about retail today, the biggest challenge in retail today with these sort of unicorn brands is that a lot of them are currently seeing valuations in the multi-billion-dollar range, with revenues today of $20 million or $50 million. And if you kind of work backwards from that valuation, it's going to take a lot more cash to fund the growth between 20 million and 1.5 billion. And so what's going to happen is early investors, founders, management, employees will get diluted horribly. Conversely, what you can do is sell just a little bit more of the company on the front end, or partner with people who take a little bit longer term perspective and grow it slowly over time and not have the pressure to exit really early for that crazy valuation. Hi.
Just wondering, why go down the equity route at all? I mean, venture debt is an equally good option. You're not getting diluted, so you're raising capital through venture debt, and you can grow. So I'm just interested in why only look at it as a dilution.
No, so I think there's multiple options. I think the challenge with debt, if you're speaking of venture debt, are you talking about convertible debt? Yeah, so that just is banking on a future valuation. So as long as all of that is in the right mindset with the right future goals, you're great. The challenge is there's nothing wrong with convertible debt because it banks on converting at a valuation in the future. The challenge is you have to make sure that valuation in the future is reasonable. Thank you for your time. Look forward to talking to you. Oh, actually, wait. So it's 6:22. I'm supposed to tell you. I was standing in between you and beer, and so I'm supposed to tell you to be back here at 6:40. So take a break. Thanks.